Greetings and welcome to you all. I'm Vincent Peljo, the Program Communication Officer at FNF South Asia. Today, I'm honored to welcome all of you to our last webinar of 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, today's discussion holds special significance at a crucial time when South Asian countries are navigating the complex challenges of energy security, sustainability, and economic growth. South Asia finds itself at a forefront when we look at the crucial transformation in its energy paradigm, with nations such as Nepal, India, Bangladesh grappling with the need to reshape their energy policies and infrastructure. These nations currently rely heavily on conventional sources such as coal, biomass, oil, and natural gas. But these countries are also expressing their commitment towards cleaner energy as a potential alternative resources for their growing energy needs. The global emphasis on clean energy also amplifies the urgency for these nations to redefine their approach to energy. Today in this webinar, the esteemed panelists will explore the complex dynamics of South Asian energy and dig deeper into the potentials of renewable energy resources. This webinar aims to focus particularly on Nepal, India, and Bangladesh, and it serves as a platform to discuss the possible benefits of energy cooperation, identifying common obstacles, share best practices, and explore key policy initiatives during the energy transition. I would like to request each one of you who is joining us today to share your questions and contribute to the discussion. Those who are watching us from YouTube or Facebook can drop your questions in the comment section. We'll also share a feedback form in the end where you will tell us how we could make our webinar series better. Thank you for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to a fruitful discussion ahead. Next, I would like to present an introductory video prepared by our team with the help of Crite Infinity. May I please have the video on the screen, Tashi?
The capital cities of Bangladesh, India, and Nepal seem to be in a regular competition in the list of the most polluted cities in the world. These countries rely predominantly on coal, biomass, oil, and natural gas for their energy needs. The use of non-renewable energy sources has been one of the primary reasons for the healthcare costs in these countries. However, in the dynamic landscape of South Asia, the winds of change are blowing through the energy sector. Fueled by a global shift towards energy chains, these countries are now working to redefine their energy policies and infrastructures. In the past few years, these countries have focused on expanding hydropower, wind, and solar power. This shift has saved billions of dollars in electricity bills, reduced millions of tons of carbon emissions, and created thousands of employments for their citizens. These South Asian nations jointly can accelerate the transition to renewable energy, ensuring energy security and economic development. However, complex geopolitical dynamics, regulatory framework, infrastructure development, and financing mechanisms are a few hurdles the region must address collectively. How can these South Asian countries work on energy transition and energy security? What are the common challenges? What kind of policy adaptations have been and should be made? How can this shift contribute to the economic development of these countries? The energy transition requires a concentrated effort by these nations to address these crucial questions. The energy shift will transition the lives of the population for the better.
Thank you, Tashi. It was a wonderful video. Thank you so much for all those team members who have worked on this video. Next, I would like to present a special video message from a distinguished friend of ours, the Honorable Member of Parliament, Mr. Torsten Herbst. But before we proceed with the video, let me share some background information about Mr. Herbst. Mr. Herbst was born in Dresden, in the former German Democratic Republic, or East Germany. Mr. Herbst embarked on his academic journey after completing his school education and civil service. He pursued international business studies and subsequently immersed himself in the realm of strategic communication and marketing. In 1999, he earned the position of Deputy State Chairman of the Free Democratic Party in the German state of Saxony. His political career further flourished from 2004 to 2014 when he served as a member of State Parliament of Saxony. Additionally, from 2005 to 19, he held the esteemed position of State General of the FDP Saxony. Since 2017, Mr. Herbst has been an active member of German Bundestag, the German federal parliament. Within the Bundestag, he currently chairs the Committee on Transport and Digital Infrastructure and concurrently serves as a deputy member of the Budget Committee. Mr. Herbst is also a dedicated advocate for the sustainable and renewable energy. His unwavering commitment to the environment cause is evident through his support for carbon neutrality and the transition towards cleaner energy sources such as hydrogen power. Now I would like to request my colleague to play Mr. Herbst's video message.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to your webinar on energy security. Of course, I can contribute from a German perspective, but it's an issue, of course, and a challenge globally. We have common goals in the light of energy transformation. We want to achieve climate neutrality. It's about access to affordable energy, especially in those countries who are poor countries. And we need to have a secure and reliable energy supply. And I think that's the topic of your webinar. And I can share some thoughts from a German perspective because of our lesson we have learned from our energy dependence on Russia. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, we were heavily dependent on energy supplies from Russia. So we imported more or less 50% of our entire gas consumption with natural gas from Russia. We imported also 50% of coal we needed and more or less 35% of our oil, which we need in Germany. So overnight, this supply ended and we had to look for replacements. We achieved it, but we paid a price because the energy from Russia was, compared to other energy supplies, very, very cheap. And now we have to have the burden for higher energy price, which is because for security reasons, the right decisions. And of course, we want to support Ukraine, but it's a hard lesson we have learned not to be too dependent just from one country or just from one source of energy. And that's why it would be my advice to try to diversify on energy sources and other countries you get energy from. For the future, we plan a mix of renewable energy and hydrogen. Of course, many European countries also include nuclear. And for some countries, this might look like a long way ahead. But of course, we have to think of balancing energy supply and the costs for energy. And we know that many countries in the world are still trying to want to increase the wealth for their population. So I think it's a smart way to increase the share of renewable energy, to look for different supplies, different countries, different sources, and that makes it more easy when you have a crisis or when you have a shortcoming from one supplier or one source of energy. So I hope you have a successful webinar and I wish you also a Merry Christmas.
Thank you so much, Mr. Herbst, for your message. We truly appreciate you taking the time, especially, it's the busy Parliament session going on right now. Best wishes for the ongoing sessions and Merry Christmas to you too. Now I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Maximilian Reinhardt. But before I hand over the stage to him, allow me to provide you a little background information about our esteemed speaker. Mr. Reinhardt is an economist with a dedicated focus on environmental and energy economics. His methodological approach emphasizes on empirical and institutional economic perspective. As a key figure at the Liberal Institute of Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, Mr. Reinhardt oversees the economics and the sustainable part. His expertise span over diverse topics such as energy supply, climate protection, innovation potentials, and agriculture. Before his time at Naumann Foundation, Mr. Reinhardt also gained a valuable experience working with the German automotive manufacturer and in internationally renowned consulting firms. Now, without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Reinhardt to share his insights with us. Mr. Reinhardt.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And it's always a great pleasure to listen to someone else presenting one CV. So thank you so much for that as well. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from my part here from Berlin. I want to give you a short introduction of what I think are some of the main drivers that we have to consider when talking about energy, about climate protection, but also about geopolitical tensions that we have to consider in these contexts. And I think Mr. Herbst did a very good job in pointing out the problems that we had to face in the last years here in Germany. And I want to basically keep on doing that in my speech now. But maybe let me first give you some ideas that I gained from the last 2 weeks in Dubai. I was there at the COP as well, and had a lot of very interesting talks with many different stakeholders, but also many different experts on the area of energy, also from countries in the global south. And basically, we saw that the renewables give a great chance to diversify energies. That is without a doubt, and we have to take this chance and take it up, both in order to increase wealth in the world, but also in order to improve health and climate outcomes for the populations affected. However, we also saw a great rise in nuclear. At least that is what many people are talking about now. And I think this is something that we have to consider very strongly as well. There are new technologies emerging. For example, Rwanda, which is, by God, is not a country that you would talk about in the first place as a very developed economy. But Rwanda currently is working on a dual fluid reactor. And these might be approaches that might be applicable also to less developed economies and might give a chance to, spread energy and that is not only clean in the terms of air pollution, but also rather carbon neutral in the context of climate change. Thus, I think it's also very important to broaden this aspect, because we always tend to talk about solar and wind energy, and in South Asia, a lot of hydro energy as well. However, there are other sources that are rising and might actually, I'm talking about, of course, also nuclear fusion, that might be a solution to the future as well. So let's keep the scope broad in general. So this is more like the introduction on what the climate and energy sphere is internationally. However, one thing that I really fear is not talked about enough is the dominance of certain actors within the production of PV and wind turbines. And of course, I'm mainly talking about China in this context, which has a production capacity of around 90 to 80, depending on who you ask, of global PV and hydro and wind turbine production. Thus, they are a very strong player, and depending on how the world might turn in the future, this might be very unpleasant for people that are dependent on these influx of wind turbines and PV capacities. Thus, this is something that I would really encourage, especially people in South Asia, to think about when they are developing a strategy, because strategy is not only short-term strategies, necessarily also long-term. So if you want to build up on a system that is mainly dependent on a strategic competitor, let's call it competitor, that is something that you have to take into account. And considering also what has been happening in the South Chinese Sea and with the Philippine fishermen and all these kind of developments that we have seen the last years, I would really deeply encourage to diversify, not only with regard to energy sources, but also with regard to where you get the production from, the actual products from, sorry. And with that regard, one last point that I would always like to focus, and that's something that we are missing out here in Germany as well, is cybersecurity in this realm as well. Because especially if you focus on renewable energies, these networks are always very, very grid and well, yeah, smart technology efficient, and thus it makes it very easy to hamper with the sites and the infrastructure. Thus, given again the geostrategic and the geopolitical situation that we find ourselves in, this is something that you have to take into account, not only from state players, but also from rogue terrorists or terror organizations or criminals. And thus, I would always put a very strong emphasis on cybersecurity in this regard as well. Other than that, I think we are on a great path. We have to double down on this path, but I'm very hopeful that with global cooperation between democracies in the world, we might actually get to a certain stand. And especially what we're seeing in India currently, I think is very promising, and we see many interesting developments, and I'm very interested in how this will all work out. Thank you so much for giving me the time to speak here, and I'm very interested in the debate. And yeah, thank you so much also to Dr. Klein for having me here in this online session.
Thank you, Mr. Reinhardt. Thank you so much for your valuable insights. I'm sure our panelists will also consider those points during our discussion. And yeah, I would like to wish you a happy holidays to you and to your family. Now, without taking up much time, I would like to hand over the stage to our esteemed moderator, Ms. Arpita Nepal, who will then introduce our distinguished panelist. But first, allow me to provide an introduction to Ms. Arpita. Arpita Nepal is an economist and co-founder of Research and Development at Samrit Foundation, an independent economic policy think tank based in Nepal, which promotes the vision of free and prosperous Nepal. She is heavily involved in the policy research that the organization undertakes, and her areas of interest includes incentives, economic governance, including public finance management, accountability, and federal devolution. She is trained in strategic planning and has extensive experience of working with parliamentarians, representatives of the private sectors, experts, and several stakeholders. Now let's welcome Ms. Arpita Nepal to guide us through this enlightening session. Please, Ms. Arpita, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Tenzin. And thank you to Frederick Naumann Foundation, South Asia Office for organizing such a timely debate and discussion and discourse on this topic in general. I think just to add on to the messages that we have already heard from Germany, from Mr. Reinhardt and Mr. Hertz, I think those are very special messages for us and very timely in the debate we are having in South Asia right now, because Bhutan, Nepal, along with India, is seeking to meet almost 50% of its energy requirements with renewables by 2030. Those are commitments that our governments have made. And Bangladesh is, going one step further and aiming to reduce its carbon emissions by 22% before 2030. So those are very concrete targets we've set for ourselves, and there is an energy transition that is happening in South Asia quite silently in one sense. Because at the end of the day, we were, especially if you look at Bhutan and Nepal, our energy mix is largely very much hydropower focused, and it has been renewable focused. But then if you look at the larger mix, it is also extremely reliant on biomass. And so that is a problem. The whole energy transition is going to be an interesting topic to cover. Just to bring a bit of a global perspective, at the International Energy Agency's 2023 World Energy Investment Summit, in 2023, the investment in renewables was targeted to be $1.7 trillion this year. It's still being evaluated whether we've met those investment demands. But at the other end of the spectrum, the magazine, The Economist, has come out with this very interesting perspective on saying, while we're worrying about, this green transition that the world is taking over, and there are climate change commitments that we have made as a world together, what is still crucial, I think, and I kind of agree with The Economist's assessment, is we're still looking at exploiting some natural resources for our storage part, to create inputs for our storage of energy. We still haven't had that kind of innovation in storage, which does not require mining of certain minerals, certain input services. So I think that there's always that dichotomy within this debate on saying, is it neutral? Can we be carbon neutral at the same time while promoting energy transition? So this is a very interesting debate to have. And today I'm very, very happy that I'm joined by a very esteemed panel who are going to take forward this debate, also give you a general idea of how South Asia is moving, where our challenges are, but also where our potential is, and what kind of things we from civil society sector can do. And I think we'll go a bit into the discussion of actionable forms. Just a housekeeping note, if you have questions, please feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A, and we'll be continuously monitoring that. And we'll take in the questions at the end of. But first, I've got a couple of round of questions for our panelists. So joining me today on this discussion is Ms. Lydia Powell from India. She's the Distinguished Fellow and part of the Energy Group at the Observer Research Foundation. And Ms. Powell has been with the Observer Research Foundation, which is a New Delhi-based think tank, for about over 20 years. Earlier, she's worked in the energy sector with Norway's largest conglomerates, and she has 3 postgraduate degrees, 2 in energy management from Norway and 1 in solid-state physics from India. And her primary work is largely on policy issues in energy and the environment, primarily in the Indian context. So I think we have a wonderful resource there. Joining us from Bangladesh is Mr. Shafiqul Alam. He's the lead energy analyst at the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, IEEFA. And he has more than a decade of experience in energy, climate change sectors. His interests primarily center around renewable energy, energy efficiency, climate finance, and policy instruments to spearhead the clean energy transition. He's also carried out some very interesting exploratory research on carbon pricing instruments. So during the last decade, he has published extensively both on local and international platforms. And in 2018, he received the prestigious International Climate Protection Fellowship from Alexander von Humboldt Foundation in Germany. And he's also the recipient of the Clean Energy Fellowship of the National Bureau of Asian Research from the USA. So welcome, Mr. Shafiqul Alam, and wonderful to have you with us. And finally, joining us from Nepal is Mr. Hitendra Dev Shakya, who was the former managing director of our state Nepal Electricity Authority. So Mr. Shakya is an electrical engineer by training. He graduated from NIT India in 1988, postgraduate diploma from Norway, and Masters of Engineering from Nepal itself. He's worked for 33 years in Nepal's Electricity Authority and subsidiary companies, government entities, and recently as the managing director of NEA until 2021. In 2017, he began NEA Engineering Company that became Nepal's largest hydropower consultant. And he has worked in different departments like the power trading, system planning, plant operation sector. So he really is the energy expert from Nepal. He's also worked in Nepal-India Cross-Border Interconnection 2016 and Sustainable Distributed Generation and Grid Access for All 2017 report. So he's worked on that. He worked for MCC Nepal as a consultant in Afghanistan, and he's served as a board director and chairman of hydropower companies within Nepal. So I'm very, very glad that we have an esteemed panel joining us today to work on these very, very important issues, work through these very important issues. Firstly, though, in order to start the conversation, I'd like to start the conversation with each one of you. If you could give us a background of a couple of things, a background in each respective country. Let's bring in the country perspective from. So what is the perspective we're looking for? A is we recently faced the energy crisis globally hit all of our countries. We faced, steep rises in energy prices in general because we are very much a fossil fuel-based economies till date. So because of this energy crisis on a global level, has there now been more of an interest from each respective governments towards energy security? What's the stance on energy security in our respective countries? Let's bring in that perspective. Vis-a-vis that, we'd also like to get an overview of what does the demand and supply mix look like at the moment? What's the energy mix in each of our countries? How much are we, working on promoting renewable resources? And especially in the last decade, if you've seen any kind of policies that have been put into place in your respective country that you think is working very, very effectively in promoting our transition towards green energy. So let's start off with this first round of trying to learn what the situation is in each of our respective countries. I'm going to start off with Ms. Powell, if I can hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. I'll start with your first question, whether the policymakers have sort of re-emphasized energy security. Definitely. Until the Ukraine crisis, India was very much focused on shifting towards renewable energy. But after the crisis, I can see a re-emphasis on coal-based power generation. That one reason is the price increase. Though India doesn't really import any electricity, I mean significant quantity from South Asia. The main concern was the increase in price of natural gas. India is a big importer of natural gas. So that shifted the focus onto domestically available coal. So you can see many statements from the government officials to prepare increased coal production from within India and to increase capacity to generate power with coal. India even emphasized import of coal so that the country doesn't run out of power. Another driver of the re-emphasis on domestically available coal is the heat. Paradoxically, climate-related heat waves have increased power demand in India, especially during summer. And this has perversely shifted the emphasis back to coal. So the emphasis has gone back to energy security, and India doesn't want to depend on imported energy sources, wants self-reliance and increase domestic production of resources. Renewable energy, though it is domestically produced, India feels that for manufacturing growth, industrialization, firm power dispatch would be required, and this can only be provided by coal. All the ministers have emphasized this. And quickly to go back to your second question, India, the primary energy basket, I'm talking about the primary energy basket, very few sources give the complete breakup, including biomass use. You mentioned biomass use. Only International Energy Agency gives the share of biomass. So I'm going by that data. Domestic resources don't give the biomass share. Even BP Statistical Review doesn't give. So coal is about 44%. Oil is about 24%, and biomass is about 21%, third largest share in terms of energy. And then it's natural gas at 6%, and non-fossil fuels, which includes hydro, nuclear, and renewable, is only 5%. So that should come as a shock to everybody. But when you go to power generation, the shares shift slightly. Coal is roughly about 75%, hydro about 10%, and natural gas about 4 to 5%. And then the rest is between nuclear and renewables. So renewables is roughly about annually about 10% of power demand it needs. Though in terms of capacity, it's the second largest. In terms of generation, it's only about 10%. So I'll stop here. So.
Wow, that's not necessarily a very good picture for renewable energy coming from India. But again, I'll come back to this, and I think we should discuss nuclear options a little bit. What's the debate going around that in India? Is there much of a debate around that? But I'll come back to that later. Let me move on to Bangladesh. What's the situation, Shafiq, if you can give us a general scenario? But also with Bangladesh, I'm a little bit interested in what about wind power potential? You have all that wind power within Bangladesh. So how do you see this scenario emerging in Bangladesh?
Thanks, Arpita. And also, I'd like to thank Frederick Naumann Foundation for inviting me and giving me the opportunity. So before moving to the challenges following the Ukraine-Russia crisis, I'd like to provide you a snapshot of the energy consumption pattern or supply pattern. If I consider the whole energy sector, then still roughly about 50% is supplied by natural gas, and roughly about 25 to 30% is biomass. And then we have mostly the remaining part of the energy, I would say, comes from liquid fuel. And coal has a very limited contribution to our overall energy system. And if we consider renewable, that is also very meager in the whole energy value chain. However, if I consider the power sector of Bangladesh, then again, it is close to 50% supplied by natural gas. It is exactly 44% right now, followed by 28% liquid fuel, mostly furnace well, that is around 22 to 23%, and 5% diesel. Share of coal has increased in recent years, in last 2 to 3 years. Now it is 15% of the overall installed capacity. We also have imported electricity from India, that is 10%. And hydro and renewable has a share of roughly about 3.2% in our installed capacity. And out of that 3.2%, overall grid connected capacity is 820 megawatt. Of that, 230 megawatt hydropower plant that was installed many years back during 1960 to 1988. And this is basically in 2008-9, one transition happened in Bangladesh, because before that we had significantly high reliance on gas. 90%, more than 90% of the power system at that time was operated on natural gas. And from then onwards, because of dwindling local gas supply, and to quickly ramp up the power system capacity, government had to increase well-based capacity based on rental and quick rental power plants. And later on, for energy security, government considered coal-based power plants. However, as you have asked, whether the energy security issue has triggered any change in Bangladesh, yes, of course, that has triggered change. Even before the Ukraine crisis, government scrapped 10 coal-based power plants during the COVID pandemic. And then following the Ukraine-Russia war, it has reappeared that the current power system model that Bangladesh is following is very fragile, highly import dependent. And that's why the interest within the government has increased. So the government currently has a plan to harness 40% clean energy for the power generation. But that does not necessarily mean all will be renewable energy, as per the recently approved integrated energy and power system master plan. But another plan that also says that by 2041, it should be 40% renewable energy, but there is some difference. There are some differences between two policies. But this is not only because of energy security issue, import dependence, but also the high price Bangladesh actually paid in last 1.5 years in terms of high coal, imported coal, and also high LNG, highly volatile LNG, and that the overall power generation cost actually increased drastically in last 1.5 years. And government had to readjust tariffs 3 times in 3 months during the first 3 months of this year. So considering all this, the interest is That's a positive trend, but the challenging part is the real implementation on the ground. However, from the private sector, there is a lot of interest, roughly around 10,000 megawatt potential renewable energy is on the pipeline, according to the available information. That is on the mostly on solar. As you have asked about wind, earlier it was considered that we don't have much stable speed to harness wind power. But recent studies substantiate that we can actually explore offshore wind power in the coast, Bay of Bengal. And the government has eventually awarded Danish firm, you may know that, two famous Danish firm. They are currently conducting the detailed feasibility study for a 500 megawatt wind power offshore wind power plant. And apart from that, recently 30 megawatt has been connected to the grid from one offshore wind. So things are encouraging in that context, I would say. Thank you. I will
Great.
stop.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Shafiq. It's a very interesting scenario coming in from Bangladesh then. I think sort of leading the energy transition to a large extent within South Asia. And yes, I was talking about offshore wind potential because you can see just owing to its location, it should have a lot of offshore wind potential within Bangladesh. So it's very encouraging signs coming in from Bangladesh. Thank you for sharing that update with us. But I think energy prices overall are going to be a major challenge driving innovation in this market. We have to bring down energy prices to an affordable level, and we really have to think innovatively in terms of like what the renewable energy source is that's going to actually bring down these prices. So, but that's also another very important point. Let me come to Nepal, where I'm from, and I have an expert with me that I'm very excited about. So, Ms. Shakya, if you can give us a general overview of Nepal's stance on energy security, but also a little bit on, its scenario. What's the scenario like in Nepal as you see it from the inside?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Pita, and thank you, FNF and Samriddhi Nepal, for inviting me, having me here. I'm happy that I can start with a positive note first. I mean, Nepal doesn't have any non-renewable fossil fuel energy sources, not yet. So our sources are fuel wood and agro-farm residue that accounts for about 2/3 of our demand, 66%. But the forests are sustainably utilized. Actually, the forest cover is increasing and is now 45% of the land mass. So that's one part, the bigger part of our energy scenario. And then we have hydropower potential, which is 150 terawatt hour of annual electricity capacity viable. But that is compared with 12 terawatt hour annual demand as of today. It's about, let's say, less than 10% of the capacity. We have 2,800 megawatt operating right now, but that generated only 11 terawatt hour. That tells you that we are spilling. And actually how much is spilled is not vocally stated, but we can guess that there is a spilled energy. And that's basically because of restricted transmission access and cross-border market access. I think that's a very big issue here in this forum also. Already we have about 8,000 megawatt of hydro, which is committed for a 25-year power purchase, and 3,000 megawatt is in pipeline, and more are having financial closure. And that this scenario gives us a fright if we say we have to spill all of that. So that's the scenario in the energy hydropower sector. The solar the claims are very high. We have very high potential, and one study shows about 30,000 megawatt potential. But because there is competition with other products like farm and other sectors, 10,000 megawatt may be really viable, but which is sufficient for Nepal. But in order to have solar, we need to have parallelly storage systems, and about 5,000 megawatt of storage system would be needed for having that solar. I think battery BSS is one option, but Nepal has a very advantage for using its height in the short distance, And so pumped storage hydro is a very good option for us, which can also be utilized, the benefits by India and Bangladesh connected in a regional grid. There's very limited wind power, not yet, and no wind power is connected, but we have about 1600 megawatt one study as shown. Other resources are not there. Geothermal is not investigated yet. So the total energy consumption, 22 data was 174 terawatt hour. That means about 5,500 kilowatt hour per capita. And our electricity as such is only 350 kilowatt hour per capita. That means there's so much ground where we can switch from other sources of energy to electricity. And electricity, as I said already, from hydropower, there's plenty of there to be developed. So from talking from energy security point of view, replacing the petroleum, LPG, and coal with improved efficient pellets and briquettes from agro-farm residues is one part, and then switching to electricity is the other part. These are the two-pronged strategies that will give us energy security. But we don't have, we have some aspirations for nuclear power, but I think it's still a very long, distant call in that regards. Grid access to electricity in Nepal is a mountainous country, as you know well, but still we have about 91% grid access. That also very weak, strong network. Off-grid is about 5% off-grid mini-grid supply, and the 4% is with a single PV cell in the rooftops. So for Nepal, the challenge is, to re-strengthen the grid is not about expanding the grid, but a quality grid and reliable supply. And a huge investment is required there, and support from forests and communities required. And the electricity demand is growing at a very high rate. The growth rate is last few years, it has been 15% per annum. Whereas peak load is growing at 7 to 8%, and that's because the load flattening and voluntary load setting by industries during the evening. But after a certain point, they will grow together, and that means a 15% peak growth will means that there's a huge demand on network expansion and substation and capacities. And again, given the mismatch between the hydropower discharges, that Q exceedance of 40% Q exceedance design discharge, which goes to less than 30% of the design capacity in winter. So there's a mismatch between supply and demand. That again puts us in a situation, a different situation of energy security. So whether we should have hydropower storage projects, increasing the cost of electricity to 15 rupees or 18 rupees upward, or should we rely on trade with India and Bangladesh and Bhutan? The latter is the most economic and preferable situation, but there are some geopolitical situation right now. I think I will talk about that in a little bit later. Regarding the government policies for supporting this renewable, Nepal gives hydropower projects about 7 to 10 years of tax holiday. That's a big plus. And custom exemption of 1% for electromechanical equipment. So that's supporting the hydropower, and private sector is very robust now in the hydropower. That's where we have 8,000 megawatt of PPA happening, and then clamoring for more PPAs. The benchmark tariff is given, so that assures the market and makes the projects bankable. But in the solar power, the government stand is, I think, hydro first. So if hydro, solar comes only where as good as the price is given as good as hydro or lesser than that. It was given 7 rupees 30 paisa per unit previously. Now it is downgraded to 5 rupees 94 paisa per unit, and that also with a queue at night mandatory capability. So basically, it is hydro, but solar again needs, I think, pump storage hydro as a support mechanism. In the urban side, net metering facility is given, And there is subsidy also given for rooftop solar net metering. And yeah, I would say that's the scenario for Nepal. A very low energy consumption at right now, and on top of that, very low electricity consumption. The resources are all renewable, and government support is there, low, but it's increasing. And it's particularly now focusing on energy switchover, like cheaper technology of induction cookers and electric cookers is also helping it. So government support is in switching over and reducing our dependence on LPG and other petroleum and in transport sector in the petroleum. And so I think Nepal's just last point I would like to mention. Nepal's supply source is distributed all over from east to west, and we are connected and planned for interconnection, cross-border connection with India from east to west, and so they will be connected to the very large load centers of India. So when we supply power from Nepal to India in those centers, it reduces their transmission and distribution costs, transmission and distribution losses. Apart from climate benefits and water benefits are already there. So it is a very win-win situation. Of course, the benefit is both ways. We also get the grid support from them, but
Thank you, Hitendra. Yeah, I agree with you. And I think like you're actually going around to the second round of questions that I wanted to do also is largely a regional trade overview. So we know like what Nepal is presenting is a lot of potential because the energy consumption within Nepal hasn't increased. The government is definitely trying to bring in policies that increases energy consumption within the country as well, trying to shift us from fossil fuel based to other kind of renewable sources or electricity based consumption mostly. So in that sense, it shows that there's a lot of potential, and we've always known that there is this potential. However, regional trade hasn't happened. So the question is, I think to a large extent, why? We know that there's this potential. We know there's this extremely high demand both in India and in Bangladesh. It always comes down to, yeah, we can talk about geopolitics endlessly, but what do you think is the major block? And I'm going to put Lydia a little bit on the spot here because India is right at the center of trading between Nepal and Bangladesh too, in that sense. But if you could give us from the Indian perspective why regional trade hasn't happened, or what kind of potential do you see down the line? Is there much appetite from India's side for regional trade to proliferate in this region?
I would say up to 2015, India's electricity sector was in deficit. At that time, there was a lot of interest in electricity trade with South Asian countries. But since then, India has added so much power generation capacity, particularly by the private sector, most of it coal-based. India has, I would say, in a way, surplus capacity right now. Its peak demand can be met by about half the capacity today. And so the interest in trade is not that high from India's side. I would say the interest is probably mainly from the fact that it's clean energy. But I would say that the narrative around trade in South Asia, before 2015, I participated in a number of events. I would say that the countries in South Asia used to sort of frame India as a big, large country with a never-ending appetite for electricity from these small countries. I think that is largely not true because when you compare the sizes of the electricity demand met by each country, India is about 90% of the South Asian demand is from India. And whatever electricity that can be supplied by South Asian countries can technically meet only a small share. I just checked before coming to the meeting, I just checked the amount of imported electricity from South Asian countries. It is less than 1%. And the central documenting agency, CEA, Central Electricity Authority, only gives the net import from Bhutan. Other countries are not even mentioned. So it's a very small share. So I would say shifting the narrative from a large hegemon wanting all the electricity and energy from small neighbors, I think the narrative has to shift from how each country can help in smoothening the demand when you generate from intermittent renewable sources, how the hydropower generation from Bhutan and Nepal can help in managing the intermittency. I think that that is one reason. And the second argument, which you always hear in these debates, is the software and the hardware. That is, the policies in countries are very different. And so first you must synchronize the software, the governance of the sector, and in parallel, you have to harmonize the hardware, transmission lines, and so on. And I think that is fairly easy to do. There is some fear that India might curtail power, if there is some geopolitical tension. I don't think that is a huge risk that they should factor into every decision. I don't think that's it can be independent of geopolitics. I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's a very interesting insight. And I think changing that narrative, like you said, that hasn't happened before. If we just look at India as a energy guzzling place where we can all sell our energy to, but changing that narrative on saying, it's meeting. But I think what's also interesting then is what about its renewable energy commitments? What about its climate change commitments? Wouldn't, changing this mix in general benefit India of relying more on clean energy rather than, like you said, reliance on coal increasing as a part of energy security is kind of an alarming tale for us, those who promote a lot of renewable energy. So I think like that narrative, and I'd like to come back to you at a later point on saying is there much of an appetite in that sense? Let me quickly move over to Bangladesh and say, Shafiq, if you could give us like an overview of what do you see from Bangladesh's point of view as a challenge in achieving this regional power trade? Is there an appetite now? That would be the first question. Is there an appetite for a regional power trade? Perhaps we are looking at only from Nepal's perspective on saying there's this excess energy we need to sell. So yeah, if you could give us that scenario.
Yeah, so thank you. So before moving to that, actually, we have successfully concluded several contracts, bilateral contracts with India, and recently one with Nepal. So in 2013, we actually concluded the first deal with India to import a couple of 100 megawatt. And then we signed another deal, and altogether it became 1160 megawatt. That is the G2G negotiation, based on G2G negotiation. And then we had another deal with the private sector from Jharkhand for roughly around 1500 megawatts. And very recently, we actually wrapped up the deal with Nepal. That was actually, we have been talking about this for probably years, many years. We actually discussed this. And apart from that, we also have another joint venture project with India. That's from the Power Development Board here and in India. So NTPC probably. So a couple of deals have been signed there. And if we look why it is not happening first, or why there is reservation. So first is, for example, Bangladesh is also energy surplus from the power sector perspective. The installed capacity that is, particularly during the winter, we only utilize 30 to 40% of the total installed capacity. Even during the summer peak demand, if we even keep the reserve margin, and beyond that, we have 20% additional capacity. So the thing is here, a lot of potential is there, not only Bangladesh, India, and Nepal, but also if we consider Bhutan across the BBIN, I think huge potential is there. So one of the opportunities could be, utilizing when Nepal has a shortage, Bhutan has shortage, they can also import, and for example, India is also, I mean, they're taking hydro from Nepal and also Bhutan. So this mutual, I mean, not only the one way, both way trade, that could be one of the options to utilize this. And other thing is, I mean, the more important, the bilateral discussion that that is solved easily, but when it becomes more than two parties, so it always becomes complex. The mindset of the policymakers of all the countries here, so they need to move a step up from the current. They need to see the whole opportunity for the energy security, that opportunity that this region can offer to this country. They need to have a clear vision to what extent they want to utilize this. So if they want to do that, for example, from Bangladesh perspective, what Bangladesh needs to do, instead of quickly ramping up capacity, they need to also keep space for regional cooperation. For example, if fossil fuel-based capacity, for instance, is increased significantly, then the government will not have the appetite to import from the regional market. And not only for clean energy from Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh also, I mean, I particularly see there is opportunity for Bangladesh also to import from, for example, Indian energy exchange market. Many a time I see that the market offers the rate that is much lower than the generation cost in Bangladesh. If we can explore all those opportunity and prepare clear roadmaps in respective countries, I think that we can exploit this potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Shafiq. That's a very interesting perspective. Hitendra, if I can come to you and slightly change the question in your context on saying, because you talked about this potential, and we know that there is this regional power trade potential within the region, but also perhaps changing the narrative, as Lydia pointed out. But if you could give us also, are there roles for these multilateral institutions that have been set up? Like, what is the role for BBIN to take this lead, or is it BIMSTEC that needs to take this lead? Who do you see as this lead agencies that can do these multilateral, either it's harmonization of power or like harmonization of the regulatory regime and so on and so forth? Do you see any kind of a role there?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as I said before, there is an air of desperation in Nepal. We have a sell or spill situation, and it's growing worse by the year. And so we, there is a saying, the wooden block knows the pain of the knife. Similarly, we know the pain. Why is not happening? Why, the fine talk is there, the diplomatic talk is there, everything is there, but still not happening. Previously, I used to get told when I was in Power Trade Department, have your goods to trade and we'll buy. And right now we say, okay, we have it. Why don't you buy? We are offering 1,000 megawatt for daily day-ahead market, and we're waiting for 1 year, and it's given in a piece by piece, 50 megawatt, 60 megawatt, 80 megawatt, and right now we have about 653 megawatt approved, and that's also for 1 year. So there is a certain roadblock. We hit a roadblock. So what is the solution? As I think you hinted about the BBIN, that's, I think, exactly what we need to do. Not a bilateral only, but a multilateral, where the smaller nations surrounding India, and which cannot trade with each other without Indian support and giving the way. So these three small nations, that is Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, should have a multilateral forum to discuss first, preparing the software part, as Ms. Lydia Powell said, about like harmonizing the grid code, their own particular grid code, trying to bring it in the same format, harmonized. The regulators start talking with each other. The system controllers in Thimphu, Dhaka, and Kathmandu start talking and trying to prepare. So these are the software part. But in the hardware part, I would say that this is my opinion from how to break this wall, how to break this knot, is that to have a joint investment projects. We had bilateral investment project with Bangladesh in Sunkosi 3. For India, we have many of them, 10,000 megawatt. But if we could have a multilateral projects, then that the product of that project, for example, let's say we have a Tamor project up in the offing as very near the location and could be used for Bangladesh, India, Bhutan also, if they wants to join the forum, and all BBI nations could invest in it jointly based on a government-to-government negotiation. And, not only the hydropower projects, but also thermal power plant in Bangladesh could be invested together by these four nations to be used only for 6 months if it's a supercritical thermal power plant, or to be used only or drawn further during peak power if it is a CCGT power plant. We could invest in Bangladesh. Bangladesh and Bhutan could invest in Nepal and have such a format. And then when money is invested, money talks. And if we have investments there, then the investment will talk. The politicians can take a seat back. And there is another point. There is one study done in 2015 by Mercados, and recently another done by the NREL of USA in 2022. Both of them showed, the first one showed that India has got a lot of things to gain by getting this power from Nepal. As I said, east to west, we have distributed generation. So the transmission costs will be reduced, transmission losses will be reduced. That was Mercados report. That was again verified by the NREL report in 2022. It said that 1.3% of annual cost will be saved for India, which is about $460 million. And if you do it coordinated with all these four countries, you would save $2 billion per annum. And the largest beneficiary will be India. And if you can integrate the market and the system, the benefit or the cost saving would be even further. So there is a clear benefit. Monetary benefit is there, climate benefit is there, waste benefit is there. So electricity as a strategic commodity, it was spoken, written in previous times, it has been removed, but it's spoken or unspoken. There is still this perception that electricity is used as a strategic commodity, and this is an outdated idea. I mean, climate change is no more a strategic thing to play with.
Right, it is a global problem.
It's almost a civilizational issue now. So,
Exactly.
there is water. It's not just climate about, going to like wind power. It's about water. If you have storage projects or pump storage projects, we conserve water, and that can be used downstream in Indian plains also. So I think now really have to graduate from that and really work with an open heart towards creating a common platform, common market. And that's where when you have a multilateral common market, the small nation, big nation, this kind of power play will also be not there. And that's why we have to work together, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal. I think.
Thank you.
I'll stop at there.
Thank you, Hitendra. I think, so yeah, one of the, again, you've very nicely transitioned into my last round of questions before we take some questions from the audience, because I can already see some questions from the audience as well, and I want to get to those. Just this last round, if you could give us briefly, so Hitendra has produced like an interesting solution of joint projects, interesting solution of saying the focus, instead of thinking of energy as a strategic commodity, is there a space for rethinking in terms of common markets? And that is, again, an interesting perspective to rethink our energy policies in general. I just want to come to you, Ms. Lydia, and if you could give us, so I have a couple of questions for you. Despite India's all these international commitments on renewable energy, on climate change, what is the appetite, and what can, say, for example, civil society organizations organizations. You work in a think tank, I work in a think tank. What is the role that you see for civil society organizations to carry these forward? Because we've talked about a lot of solutions that has to be done on a government to government level, but things aren't moving. And, you know, as advocates for change, as people who are players in the market who really want this change to happen, what kind of role do you see for civil society organizations to hold our governments accountable to these commitments they have made and make this kind of common platform possible?
Thank you. I would say that when we were in the fossil fuel-based era, we still are, but we are planning to move away from that. It was competition for resources. So each of the South Asian nations competed for resources. But I think the renewable or clean energy era can foster cooperation, particularly if it doesn't lead to renewable energy mercantilism, which is happening, I think, unfortunately. The reason I say it can foster cooperation is, like I said earlier, managing intermittency requires a lot of effort and investment, and cooperation with South Asian countries can facilitate managing intermittency at the lowest cost. I think India's peak electricity demand and South Asian countries which have high capacity for hydro generation, the peak power demand in summer in India and hydro generation in South Asian countries sort of occur at the same time, which offers a great opportunity for cooperation. And I think in the renewable energy era, the control of the grid matters and not necessarily control of resources, pipelines, and so on. And renewable energy by nature is difficult to control because it depends on flows, not on stocks like the earlier time. So I would say that the renewable energy, the clean energy era does offer, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry about the dog. Offer a lot of opportunity for cooperation. Now I'll come back to your question. Many of you have asked about India coming forward to work with the South Asian countries. I think this effort I followed for nearly 25 years, and I have not understood why India cannot be the benevolent hegemon which fosters cooperation. I really haven't found the answer to that. One reason is India is extremely focused on self-reliance. You would have seen in all our documents. And after the crisis in Ukraine and the other in energy markets, the self-reliance, strategic self-reliance has become far more important. Take, for example, renewable energy. Most of the equipment for solar power generation comes from imported from China, and India has realized that this is a big risk and it is incentivizing domestic manufacture. In my personal opinion, I would say that this would actually increase the cost of renewable power generation and slow down moving towards clean energy. I think it's the same mindset which prioritizes self-reliance that keeps India from wholehearted cooperation with South Asian countries. Now, coming back to the question from the chair, civil society organizations, I would say, are playing a very big role in pushing India towards renewable and clean energy. Most of the work in modeling future demand, how renewable energy integration can happen, is done by the civil society, which is very, I would say, very technically qualified and supports the government in all respects. But coming back to the government, coming back to the most recent event, that is the COP28, if you look at the government's position, India did not sign the pledge for tripling renewable energy capacity and for increasing energy efficiency along with China. And the reason it is given is that the text contains a clause on phasing out coal. So you can see there is a contradiction. India is very focused on fossil fuel-based energy for its industrialization. But I would say that it is also interested in moving towards clean energy. And it is not clear how this contradiction will be handled. And like the fellow panelists said, cooperation can probably push India towards cleaner energy path. There was a question, but I'll answer that later.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Lydia. I think it's a good overview of where the policymakers' mindset is at. And, you know, as civil society organization, for us to, I think it's important to produce research and evidence on saying why this is an important step to take. So that's very one concrete idea that you have given us. If I can come to Shafiq, and, you know, if you can give us, what's the role of civil society organizations within Bangladesh? And do you see them playing a role in promoting this idea forward that regional trade is possible?
Thanks. So yes, civil society organizations, they are playing important roles in Bangladesh, like the previous speaker said, in India, they have been playing. So for instance, even before I joined IEEFA, actually IEEFA produced a study on the overcapacity of Bangladesh power system. And when I joined IEEFA, I was attending one conference, and there, you know, one university professor, highly, recognized in Bangladesh, he was mentioning that first time somebody mentioned that Bangladesh power system has overcapacity, that was IEEFA in that. So the thing is, the think tanks and civil society organizations, they are producing work that have significant impacts in different discussion, policy level discussion, and also policy preparation. Of course, there are glaring gaps on implementation level, but still these things are being recognized. Another event I attended, in that event also, without, the speaker did not see me, but he was mentioning my work, that study was done by so-and-so of IEEFA, and that has this thing, and I completely agree with that. So in that sense, I would say civil society thing, not only IEEFA, irrespective of IEEFA, there are many other organizations, local, international, regional, they have been working, and they have created the narrative that clean energy, renewable energy, that can actually, if not 100%, we are not at that stage, but it has significant potential for Bangladesh and the region to reduce the average generation cost, to meet the peak demand, even without storage system. So these narratives have been built, and civil society organizations have played a significant role. And for that reason, if I see from the Bangladesh context, only 2 to 3 years back, in different forums, I saw that policymakers even did not want to discuss renewable energy. Now they are, even if not openly discussing, they internally discuss. I come to know that, yes, they think that renewable energy capacity should be increased. And that's why they allowed the signing of a couple of 1,000 megawatt renewable energy project. So it is a big pipeline now. I'm not sure about the implementation. Time will tell how much will be, how many of them will be implemented and how many of them will not be. But still, it's a positive change. And another thing is, there now the discussion started because of the power tariff. The tariff government is offering to the private sector for the solar. So civil society is raising the concern that this tariff is very high. If you want to take the real opportunity of renewable energy, clean energy, then the tariff should be competitive. So discussion has been started, and policymakers are also thinking that, yes, probably they need to also adopt the reverse auctions to reduce the price.
Thank you, Shafiq. So some very interesting debate coming out of Bangladesh civil society organization pushing forward this agenda, both in terms of this tariff structure debate is an interesting one that's coming forward, but also opening up the conversation within policymakers and pressurizing them on saying, look, here's an alternative. I think it's an important role to play. So thank you for pointing that out. Mr. Shakya, you've served within the government agency for such a long time. You have such a big experience. What do you think is, is there a role for civil society organizations in this sector of us trying to promote this regional trade or bringing this renewable energy discussion to the forefront? If you could give us your views very quickly.
Yeah, I think there is, in fact, from all these four nations, it's more so in Nepal. For promoting renewable energy, I mean, we are already in the forefront. We have enough of those civil society activism there. Where we need it is in promoting this regional trade. And that's where we see that civil societies are there in their own cells, in their own nations, active in Bangladesh, active in Bhutan, active in India, and active in Nepal. But a joint multilateral civil society activism would help. And I'm talking about this market formation. Why is there this market not formed, regional market? Why is it that we have to go and sell it to Delhi and Bangladesh has to go and buy it from Delhi? Why can it be a general regional market? Let's say I studied from Durgapur, which is near Calcutta. So I like to think of a regional market center in Kolkata. So that will be near to Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, BVIN, and that would really be the center if it expands later for BIMSTEC, including Myanmar and Thailand and so on. So that is, I think, where civil society can help, and also take up this initiative that has gone down. I mean, there was an initiative by SARI, South Asian Regional Initiative, USAID funded, and now it is not there. So it could be taken up with maybe all these four nations and continue the discussions about, as I said, harmonized grid code, system control coordination, regulators, market design, market mechanism, settlement mechanism. All these things could be started while a larger investment momentum starts to gain and towards multilateral projects and multilateral transmission projects. Transmission projects from Tripura via Bangladesh to West Bengal as a connectivity for power from Arunachal, and similarly from Bongaigaon in Assam to Inerwa in Nepal, and then to Bareilly in Uttar Pradesh, would provide a highway, transmission highway. So invest in that. So when we invest in infra, the market will occur. If you build the roads, vehicles will start flying. So I think this is also one sector we have to think, not wait for the vehicles, but let's just build these transmission lines and they will pay for it itself. For a few years, it will be maybe not profitable. So these are the reasons where civil society could sensitize the government, and not only the government, but also the private sector, and show them this is the way to go. This is the way to invest in a long-term future of the region. I think, civil society has a role there, I think.
Thank you, Hitendra. So it again, very interesting new ideas coming forward in terms of, maybe the civil society activism is not just on generation of renewable energy or meeting renewable energy commitments, but this vision of a common market and what that looks like. So those are very interesting ideas and recommendations that have come forward from today's discussion. Now, I'm going to move forward to the question and answer from the audience. And we have a couple of questions all revolving around solar energy. If you think about solar energy projects of, say, for example, 1 megawatt or 500 kilowatt, is this economically beneficial? Is it worth investing in solar energy? How do such community projects start? Do you see a potential of that in our region? And there's one specifically for Ms. Powell, where, you said that India doesn't have a lot of demand, but it's using a large amount of fossil fuel. So why not use clean electricity. And I think we addressed that to a certain extent. But yeah, if you'd like to, again, briefly take that. But I want to throw this question out to the panel itself in terms of solar power potential. What are we seeing? Is it just the production of photovoltaic lenses that's coming from China that is making us skeptical of going this route? Is that, not necessarily enough potential in this region? What's the feeling about solar energy, especially targeting, say, small rural communities who are more off the grid kind of communities? So if you can quickly address that question, anyone can jump in, please feel free.
I'll just start. Solar mini grids are working in many rural communities. Most of them are generously funded by development funding agencies. The problem is standalone decentralized energy projects, solar energy projects are more expensive than grid connected projects. And without external support, many of the projects collapse after the source of funding dries up. That is one reason why they are not being scaled up to the entire country. And as you might know, the intermittency of solar energy calls for storage, and storage is particularly expensive as of today. In the future, it might improve. Only yesterday, in one of the interactions with the press, our power minister gave a figure of 10 Indian rupees per kilowatt hour for storage. That is almost 3 times what an average consumer pays for electricity today. So these are the challenges in developing small mini grids in rural areas. It is successful when you look at it at a micro level, only the project. But if you unpack it, you will see very low cost funding or sometimes aid behind it. And so unless these issues are addressed, maybe some kind of technological breakthrough which reduces the cost of storage. Storage is very essential because you need lighting in the night. So when the technology develops sufficiently to reduce the cost, this might take off. I'll quickly answer the second question because it's very important. That is, India doesn't have a lot of demand. I must qualify this statement. India built a lot of capacity, almost the same capacity it took nearly 50 years to build. It built in 10 years from 2015 when the electricity sector was opened up. The expectation was there will be a significant growth in demand, but that didn't happen. And that is because India's consumer income did not grow as projected. So actually, it's a sad situation that consumers are not consuming enough electricity. And that is why we have surplus electricity, not because everybody has enough and more, and we can export it to other countries. That's not the truth. Indian incomes, industrialization hasn't occurred fast enough as expected. So Indian electricity and energy consumption is actually the lowest among G20 countries. The per capita consumption is lower than what is required for a tropical country and so on. So the surplus is because we are not consuming enough to become a middle income or industrialized country. So that is why we are left with a lot of surplus capacity. Why not use clean energy? I think theoretically it's very useful, but I would say given the size of India's electricity demand, even if Nepal and Bhutan increase their capacity for hydropower, it will meet maybe at the maximum, maybe about 5% of India's electricity demand. We have to keep the size, relative size of the economies in mind when we talk about cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lydia. And if you could quickly type in the answer to the organization in South India, if you know them already, because that's a very specific question targeted to you. Let me come quickly to the solar power potential. Yeah. In Nepal then, Hitendra ji?
Yeah, I would like to add to what is just said by fellow panelists there. Regarding solar power in off-grid areas and in on-grid areas also, for Nepal's small system, when we talk about increasing solar power, immediately the problem comes about storage, as already said. But as I indicated earlier also, Nepal can provide some solutions. It has the benefit of height over a short distance. In Kulikhani Dam itself that you had visited recently, there is a potential. The Kulikhani Dam itself has 60 megawatt, but there's a 800-meter height. There's a storage for pond, and it can provide 250 megawatt of pump storage hydro. So I calculated that we can make this type of pump storage hydro in a 10 crore Nepali rupees per megawatt. Less than that. If it is so short like Kulikhani, then it's 8 crore Nepali rupees per megawatt. And that comes to, if we say use 6 hours per day, 365 days, 2,000 units per unit of installed capacity, then the storage cost, it comes down to 5 rupees per unit, which is so attractive that makes solar feasible. And it's a very interesting now phenomenon. So now, again, when government to government, they are talking about strategic commodity and saying, okay, this electricity, instead of procuring electricity, we can use it as a strategic commodity. Governments might do things like that. The civil society has, I think, a duty to sensitize and talk about, not just electricity, but there are so many other benefits, climate and water and all that. So you don't have that luxury to say this is a strategic community. Come on. You can support in Nepal and build those pump storage hydros all from west to east to west. There are, I think, more than 200 sites were recently identified ideal for pump storage hydro, which would be useful for the intermittence of solar, intermittence of wind. And and the second thing is that the seasonality of our hydro could be used to not phase out Indian coal, but to hibernate Indian coal. Okay, India has 150,000 megawatt, and what we can do, 10,000 megawatt, and Bhutan can do another 10, 15,000 megawatt. 25,000 megawatt of hydro, 6 months extra, could hibernate these coal power plants, pay for their capacity while their capacity charged, while they are sitting idle, but then extract carbon credit money when they are generating, and it could balance out. I think there's something for each of us here. For all of us, we all will have a win-win situation, I think.
Thank you, Hitendra. All right, briefly coming to Shafiq, if you can give us a quick overview of how things are, the solar energy market is in Bangladesh.
So the question actually was on the off-grid area, right?
Yeah.
The small. So regarding the off-grid area, I mean, when I mentioned about the renewable energy currently installed capacity, I mentioned the grid connected. So we have roughly around 400 megawatt. Those are off-grid. Those are called solar home system. So Bangladesh has one of the, highly successful solar home systems program that helped provide access to electricity in the off-grid and far-flung areas of the country. So it did well until 2021 because until 2021, I mean, the government in 2022 declared 100% electricity access and built all the lines, transmission and distribution lines. So now everyone theoretically have access to grid. So all those solar home systems are now stranded asset. So what happened due to lack of maintenance and that there was lack of demand as well. So all those solar service provider, they are not in rural area. So those are junk now. So now from that point, because we have already the 100% access to electricity, now from that point, now again going back to decentralized system. So that could be an option, but we need to do a proper study how we can do that to accommodate solar. But I see the potential in a rooftop solar system, particularly for industries, commercial buildings, and government has changed the guideline recently, under which even the newly constructed building, residential building with certain roof space, they will have to install at least minimum percentage of their sanctioned load to get new electricity connection. So I see there some potential, I mean, significant potential in terms of solar energy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Shafiq. All right, it is time for me to more or less wrap up our discussion. The time has completely flown by, and I'm constantly looking at the clock. It was a very, very interesting discussion. Thank you to all my panelists for such a wonderful oversight and overview, but also some very, very critical messages coming out on saying how we should think about advocacy for the renewable energy market overall. Think of it from the perspective of what the energy mix looks like right now for each of the countries. Think about creating a common market, think about harmonizing regulations. So there are some very, very interesting solutions that have come forward that I think provides the space for civil society organizations also to take it forward. So thank you very much to my panelists. And finally, to conclude the program, I'd like to invite FNF South Asia's head, Dr. Carsten Klein, who's going to join us. Let me give you a brief background of Dr. Carsten Klein. His professional career has always had an international dimension. He started working with the German Armed Forces, joining the Foreign and Security Policy section of the Parliamentary Group of the Free Democratic Party in the Bundestag, the German parliament in Berlin, followed by him managing the FDP parliamentary groups in 2 state assemblies. He was also managing the department responsible for international business of Federal Employment Agency, the Central Placement Office for Foreigners and Specialists. So Dr. Klein has always been, thank you very much for actually providing us a platform on this regional debate. And we now, it's brought forward even more the importance of having a regional debate, not just country strategy discussions. And I think today's discussion sort of highlighted that fact. I handed over the forum to you to give us your concluding remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, just saying thank you very much on behalf of Friedrich Naumann Foundation to all of you. It was again really a great, very interesting, insightful discussion in a pan-South Asian context. And as you asked several times, and the replies also reflected on that, pan-South Asian platforms on that, more understanding, more learning from each other, more research is really extremely needed. And of course, what we also need is more policy making on this particular field of energy policy. Let me also underline 2 other aspects which are very close for Friedrich Naumann Foundation. Number 1 is schools and students. I think we just had last week a discussion on blue curricula, making students more open, creating a broader sense of awareness for questions of renewable energies. I think that is still a need in all of our countries, including the European ones and also our South Asian countries. And let me also highlight that apart from other aspects, we see enormous potentials in the renewable energies also for new job perspectives. I think that is gives us a lot of room for further discussion, and we are very, very happy to continue this discussion in the various fields. So thanks again to Thorsten Herbst for the video message. Thanks to our dear colleague and friend, Mr. Maximilian Luz Reinhardt from the Liberal Institute. Of course, thank you very, very much for moderating this session, dear Mrs. Abita from our long-standing partner Samriddhi in Nepal, dear Mrs. Powell, dear Mr. Shafiqul Alam from Bangladesh, and dear Mr. Dev Shakya from Nepal for your very, very interesting points of discussion. We are very happy that we have our partners with us. I will just, because this is webinar number 49, starting this webinar series already 2 years ago, we would not have committed or would not have organized one of them without our dear partners, Samriddhi, CCS in the field of education, CPPR in the field of geopolitics, FMC in the field of medium-sized enterprises, and all the others. We are very happy that we have partner organizations in nearly all the South Asian countries. And as I said, we will definitely continue. Apropos continuing, our next upcoming webinar number 50, will be on the celebration of our International Day of Education on the 24th of January 2024 with our partner CCS. And let me conclude that with a very deep thank you to our team in Friedrich Naumann Foundation, dear Mrs. Hasija, dear Mr. Paljor, Mrs. Mishra, Mr. Gimre, dear Tashi, and Mr. Hoffman for your continuous support. Without the help of Mr. Meffert from our head office in Potsdam, all of these activities could not take place. So thanks again to all of you for your continuous interest. Thank you to all of our guests, again to all of our panelists for your time and your extremely relevant insights. Do follow us on social media channels. And last but not least, I wish you, if you are celebrating that, a very good Christmas time, and also a very good, prosperous, healthy, and also a little bit liberal year 2024. All the best to you, and thank you very much.